Waiting for it. Okay, so there we are. So I'm going to do just a brief introduction, and then we'll get started.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Greetings, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mike from the Comic Watcher Show, and tonight we have a special presentation of the Comic Watcher Show Presents. And with me is Rob Multari, he's Vice President and Creative Director of Lone Wolf Comics. But more importantly, I should say, is he is the creator of Nightwolf, is what we are here to talk about tonight. Rob, thanks for joining us. Appreciate you taking out the time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So how are you and your family doing during this pandemic? Hopefully you guys are staying safe.
Yeah, I've actually, so I have a full-time job aside from Lone Wolf Comics,
Right.
and I've been working remotely since March. I haven't been to my office since then, which is weird to say.
Yeah.
But, I've been kind of, I do internet, web development and email marketing and stuff. So, I mean, really, as long as I have internet, I'm okay. My wife, on the other hand, she is a mental health therapist, and she has been busier than ever because of everybody, but she's been having to do, the remote stuff too, with her clients. And so that's been hard on her because she likes being around people and, where I'm always in front of a computer screen anyway, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's I've been teleworking since about February, March timeframe as well.
Yeah,
and we just started. I just started going back to the office one day a week, and the rest of the time I'm here doing the same thing in front of a computer screen. Yeah. But it's nice to have that option to telework.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we're the lucky ones.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who don't have that same ability. And I feel bad for my kids, like with my in the springtime they were doing the schooling, and I had to help with that as much as I could. And then now my two boys are actually back in school, but they have to wear the masks all day long.
Oh,
and I feel bad, especially my oldest boy is starting, his nose has been rubbing raw. So I feel bad for him, and because he's almost like, he's 12, but he's like almost as big as I am now. So like,
oh my.
And then the masks for us, like big guys, are you know how it is, it's tight. Yep. Where like my younger son, he's got the adult masks are too big and the kids ones are too small. So he's like, he's got that loose thing falling off him all the time. And then my daughter, she's just turned 3, doesn't want to keep it on.
Right. Oh man, well, that's good to hear that everyone is safe and sound and doing well on your end. That's really great news to hear. So let's dive right into this, man. For those out there in the world of the internet that don't know Rob Multari, Lone Wolf Comics, give us an introduction to what Lone Wolf Comics is all about and who Rob Multari is.
So Lone Wolf Comics is my self-publishing company. I started publishing comics in 2017 was the first issue of Nightwolf that I released. Okay. And so basically, it's Nightwolf is a story about a young man who finds out that he's born a werewolf, gets thrown into a supernatural war, and has to learn how to deal with becoming a werewolf and dealing with the loss of his basically his life before that. And, a lot of things happen, where he's, he was very popular. He was had a full ride scholarship, and then, his friends and family, his girlfriend, everything kind of gets ripped away from him. And now he's kind of like learning this new traumatic life.
Yeah. Traumatic to say the least. Cause I mean, it's definitely, because when I got into it, Matt, I think you were talking to him originally, had texted me through Slack, our little messenger service and stuff that we use, and he's like, "Hey, I think this book is kind of in your wheelhouse. Type, it's werewolves," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, okay, great, yeah, it's werewolves. I mean, fantasy werewolves, sure, why not?" And was definitely hooked on that first read, just because it doesn't read as your normal coming of age type of tale. There's like real scenarios in there where, you got the mall scenes that they're just kind of messing around. The high school, there's dings on the locker, the floors are dirty. So he's like, God, I'm back in high school. This is great, And there's just little nuances like that I think that add to the story and the depth of the characters that really make this stand out. To where it's not like just your regular, oh, this teenager's becoming a werewolf. He doesn't know how to
I wanted to establish in the first issue that he had a life. Like I didn't want to just start like, where Batman starts out as, he's a superhero and then you tell his story, just, you know what I mean? Like
sure.
A flashback. No, I wanted to establish and give that, like, where everybody can feel like this is, your experience from high school. You have the same kind of group of kids. You have this is, your biggest worries then were, who's going to win the football game or who's going to go ask you to the dance and, that kind of, or, just in general, like there's also the scene where the one kid was being picked on by the other kid,
right.
That stuff happens, I mean, I experienced being bullied.
Sure.
And I've also, so it's in that kind of similar situation. I wanted you to relate to these characters, kind of get a feel for them, and then react to what happens to them later.
Right. Yeah. Especially the prom night scene. I'm like,
yeah. Very Carrie like.
Yeah. It's like this is like Fright Night all over again. Like what? Speaking of that though, what were some of your influences that got you into comics? What was that moment that you were like, I want to write, I want to create. This is what I want to do.
So getting into comics was way before even knowing that I wanted to do it. So for me, getting into comics was when I was younger, learning to read. I'm dyslexic and have attention deficit disorder. So for me to learn how to read was a lot more difficult, and I had to do special classes and all kinds of stuff. And my mom even had to take me to a specialist. That was when they were first diagnosing this kind of stuff. So, at first, like, back in, the early late 80s, early 90s, this was kind of like, coming about.
Right.
And so kind of like as a trick for my mom to help me learn to read, she got me, there's this set of Batman comics that had a cassette tape that came with it. So, and it was actors reading the word bubbles and the thought bubbles. And so I was able to kind of put the context together with the words and kind of start learning that way. And then we did similar things with other kind of books, like the Teddy Ruxpin, how he had the.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But in general, like I always gravitated to comics and superheroes. I loved Batman, the Hulk, Spider-Man. Those were my first introductions into comic books. And the Hulk comics that I had at the time was when he was in his Gray Hulk phase.
Yeah.
Which was weird to me because I watched the cartoon when he was green. So it really, to me, I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah. This is the wrong comic.
Right, exactly. But it was cool. One issue that I remember, and this is a very iconic one, where Iron Man is coming up through the bar floor, pushing the Gray Hulk up, through the ceiling. And that was one of my, like, kind of, putting that Marvel had a bigger universe together. And I recognize that like Spider-Man and Hulk both had the Marvel logo. And then I remember watching the X-Men pilot from the 80s, The Pride of the X-Men, that also had the same Marvel logo on it. So I was like, oh. And then I really was enamored by Wolverine, who I thought was Australian because of that pilot episode. Because they gave him, because it was an Australian being, the voice of Wolverine, which confused the crap out of me when I found out he was Canadian.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, right. So, and I read that, when I read that, I started getting his comics and the X-Men comics. And then when I was, started reading them and actually putting that together, I'm like, wait a minute, that's not what he sounds like. But yeah, so long story short, after I got into comics that way, fast forward to junior high, I really, by that time I had a large collection of comics. And so I think what really, like, I love the stories. I wanted to kind of, like, I always felt like whenever I watched a movie or a TV show or something epic or read a comic that I wanted to build a world like that or be a part of something that big,
Yeah.
So I started doing fan fiction for the X-Men and Wolverine, and at the time Wolverine had lost his adamantium.
Yeah.
And I wanted to bring it back. I was traumatized by that. It
Sure.
it was like watching Optimus Prime die.
Yeah.
So I wrote a story about, and I wanted to create a whole new team. So I created this idea where this team was being formed, but at the same time, if you recall from my series, Night Wolf, there's a character named Tartarus who's a demon.
Yeah. Yes.
At the time, he originally was in my fan fiction, and I called him Troll at the time.
Oh, cool.
And so that character evolved with me as I went, but he was like basically this unstoppable force, and nothing could stop him and they happened to be in Canada. So they Professor X, this new group of heroes that I made, and Wolverine just happened to take the side trip because they were near the Weapon X facility. And they had to get the adamantium back to then take on this unstoppable creature. So that was like my first story into it. And I sent those to Marvel in 7th grade, and I got this very polite rejection letter.
Sure. That's awesome.
But it was like, hey, we encourage you to keep up. And, so from there it was like, okay, I want to do this, but I'm going to do it with my own characters.
Yeah, very cool. It's awesome. Like, speaking of influences, there's a vibe that I get from, say, like old horror movies like Fright Night, or say like the Universal Monsters. There's definitely a feeling of me being like, 10, 12 years old, staying up late, watching old HBO movies or something, like those movies that like were just kind of like almost like an indie release type deal.
Right.
And it's just like fantasy. Like growing up with, were you into monster movies? Were you into like horror? Was there obviously an influence, kind of coming up?
So it was one of those things where I was like, growing up, I love Halloween. I like, the traditional, werewolf, vampire, supernatural style stuff, ghosts, witches, skeletons. But as far as like horror movies, like my parents wouldn't let me watch those, but my sister, I have 2 older sisters, and they would be watching stuff like Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, whenever it was on, I think whenever it was that 2-part series that they had back on, obviously it was clean and there wasn't a lot of blood, but it still scared the crap out of me. So I would come behind the couch and be like, and I would just watch enough to give me nightmares. So and this was another, like, my mom must have been worried sick about me growing up, because like I had night terrors. I would go and sleep on their floor, like, all kinds of stuff. But and what's funny is like I still get nightmares now, but like a lot of the stuff that I dream about, I write down in a notebook, and a lot of it becomes part of my stories.
Oh wow. And,
yeah. So like, I think it's my subconscious like working through this, but also creating stories at the same time. And if I, it's one of those things, like if you don't write it down, and it'll slip, so, but writing it down jogs memory. I'm like, oh yeah, that was great stuff. Or I was like, wow, this is really confusing. Let me try and make sense of that in this, kind of setting. But yeah, growing up, it wasn't until like I was in high school when I was dating, and I didn't want to be the chicken, who couldn't go to a movie with his girlfriend, and so like I just powered through every single horror movie, like with my first steady girlfriend. We literally went to the movie, like Blockbuster back in the day when you had to rent DVDs and tapes and stuff.
Yeah. Friday night at Blockbuster, right?
Exactly. We would get stacks of DVDs. Yeah. And we would just power through them, and and a lot of them happen to be like scary movies. And then like same with my friends, like my group of friends would get similar to the guys that were in like the comic at that first issue. We would get together and we'd watch like Children of the Corn and all kinds. Like we would just go through and watch them all, and then we'd mess with each other, like because like we'd either be like pass out at each other's houses, and we just would mess with each other all night. Yeah, I remember when I got introduced to the Halloween movies, my oldest brother
had the Michael Myers mask, and he had got like a blue set of coveralls, and he's walking around the house. And so next thing I know, like Michael Myers is coming out of my kitchen. I'm like 9 years old, and I'm just like, I ran out of the house, and my mom was coming home from work, and he drives past me, and I'm running down the street. And she's like, stops, like, Michael, what are you doing? I'm like, Michael Myers is in the house. So that was my introduction to horror movies, and I was kind of hooked ever since then. It's probably has something to do with PTSD, but other than that, I'm fine. It turned out just good.
I tried to analyze, like, even before I watched all of the Nightmare or Friday the 13th, I tried to be like, well, why is Jason the way he is? And I find out that no one really knows. I mean, they still haven't explained like, how he is the way he is. So like, it's like, but my head went like, I was making up all these different reasons why, you know, and even like what he actually came from, what he was before I knew anything, like my mind would like come up with all these different things that like to why these things are, the way they were. And then come to find he didn't really explain it. I'm like, this is bullcrap. But it was going back to like one of the nights that we were watching Children of the Corn. I lived a small, like I grew up in a small town, one stoplight, lots of cornfields.
Oh God!
So we were out by we stayed at my buddy's house, which was right down the road from a very big cornfield, and he's like, "Hey, let's go for a walk." I'm like,
I'm good. I'm staying here. Doors locked,
right?
Windows locked and board and all that stuff. Oh, that's funny. So back onto Night Wolf. How did Rodney come about? Where does Night Wolf begin?
So again, that kind of goes back to the so there was a mutant who had a kinetic energy blast. Was his he would be able to focus it into a weapon or or to his fist or something. And I wrote a kind of a return to Genosha, if you remember what the Extinction Agenda. It was kind of like a return to Genosha. They were rebooting the whole mutate slave thing, and I really liked the whole where Wolfsbane was kind of stuck in her own body until she was transformed back into a werewolf. And I kind of did a reverse of that. And I had like a secondary mutation, like, how Beast and a few of the other ones kind of went through that.
Right.
That secondary mutation was triggered where he was also a wolf character. So he was a, werewolf character with this kinetic energy charge. And so after that rejection letter, I took that and I was like, all right, I'm going to retool this to my own, way of, my own world, my own universe, my own characters. And I took that same idea. I was like, because I loved werewolf movies, but I was very into like just in general, I like the werewolves where they look more wolf-like than like, like how the regular Wolfman from like Universal Monster was kind of like, he just basically was a hairy dude, or you know what I mean?
He was just a bearded guy who forgot to sleep Monday morning.
I'm like, listen, I got a beard and hair too. I mean, I can tell you. But like, I like that aesthetic where it's like they have the wolf head, they're basically a wolf that can stand up, but like with a human torso in a way. And I liked the thought of them being able to change back and forth. So I stuck with that in the character, and for him, so it was like it was like I wanted to be able to tell a story of how this kind of happened, but I didn't want it to be, the typical you got bit. He was
right.
He was, this is a part of a bigger universe, like kind of I'm a fan of all kinds of genres, right? So like I basically dumped like, and you don't see everything yet, but as the story goes on and as the universe builds, there's hints of mythology, there's hints of fantasy. So like magic, there's all kinds of stuff that come to play into this. And, werewolves being they're a magical race that's not just, they're not just a curse, you know what I mean? And they can think for themselves. And that's basically where this all stemmed from, was taking those characters and putting them in their own world and, so that's basically just rehashing and taking a lot of that. You when you start into a story, you want obviously something people can relate to. And at the time when I first started writing this, I was in high school when I first started writing this particular story. So I wrote about what I knew, and that was high school and football, all kinds of stuff. So it was basically that's where that started from. And it kind of evolved as I grew up into something, less juvenile, but still keeping the elements of, of high school, which, making it where you can actually feel it and re-experience it.
Yeah, absolutely. To talk about the aesthetics, you have some remarkable art in this book with the likes of Carlos Herrera, Gat Melvin, and Bokumon Studios. The one thing that is really enjoyable aside from the plot is the fact that the wolves don't look, like you said, like your basic Universal monster. There's there's muscles, but it's not like that 90s comic muscle, which I'm a fan of. Don't get me wrong.
Of course, I love the 90s comics.
Yeah,
everybody wants to run them as much as they want. I enjoyed them.
Oh, absolutely, it was a great era. Right? But there's just especially I think in I want to say issue 4, where Rodney is starting to turn back to his human form, where there was like he was still had part fur, part human, but it was kind of like an even distribution. It didn't look. It was just like oh, he's still kind of stuck in this transition phase. But you see that throughout the whole book, though. Even in the blood shots, it's not spattered. It's not everywhere, but it's kind of contained, unless it's that prom, the prom scene, which is that is nightmare fuel right there. But how did you come to work with Herrera, Melvin, and Bokumon Studios? Did you pursue them with your story and kind of go, "This is what I'm looking for," or
yes, in a way,
kind of approach you?
Yeah, so I found all 3 of them actually through DeviantArt.
Okay.
A website that most artists, I had my original character designs that I did and other art that I had posted there as well. And I kind of, it was basically, I was looking around for an artist to work with for my story, because I knew I didn't have the time, nor did I have the talent of what I wanted to see.
Okay.
Like, I'm okay.
Sure.
For example, like, I drew my own tattoo,
right. Okay.
That was basically my character when I was 18.
Okay.
I'm okay, but I'm not, that was like a lot of like tweaking over a period of time, like sitting bored in math class. But, geometry had nothing on that. No.
Yeah, your arm looks great, by the way.
Yeah, well, it's been there for actually 20 years now.
There you go.
But so I'm okay at art. I get the point across, but I want something epic, and I know what I like as a fan, and I wanted to see something that complemented where I was going with the story, and so it took some time. Like I had money saved up. From and I was like, listen, I got to hire somebody. I know I'm going to have money up front. No one, I've tried reaching out to people to partner with. Nobody was having it. Yeah. And that's advice that I'll give any writer. Just if it's, unless you were very close with somebody, it's very hard to find a partnership. Just have the money ready. You're going to have to pay somebody commission. So basically there was a lot of like people who were like interested. I put out an ad through DeviantArt and say, hey, I have this much money. I need character designs and I need a first issue done. And, I had a lot of people try out. I basically gave, I wanted them to do 2 different characters, which was Rodney in his human and him as Nightwolf. And then I also wanted to see how they did Snowpaw, because I wanted to see the 2 different variations between the male and female werewolf.
Sure.
Again, the same. I wanted to see the aesthetics. I didn't want to see where, they drew the werewolf male exactly like I wanted, and then the female not have a snout. I didn't want to have a hairy female. You know what I mean? I wanted the actual same kind of aesthetic.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
You know, like I wanted to make look they were part of the same race, not just like, you know, some chick growing hair.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So, because I didn't want it to be, you know, in a way, I didn't want it to be like a sexual thing either. Like I wanted it to be, you know, I wanted it to be like, you know, that they were related, that they were part of the same race, that they were, you know, they look like they belong together in a way. So that kind of went on, and I didn't find exactly what I was looking for, and then I just came across one of Carlos's drawings of a werewolf, and I'm like, I have to reach out to this guy. Like, this is exactly what I'm looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So I reached out to him, which, you know, he's from Chile, so that kind of took a little back and forth.
Sure.
And you know, you know, he loved the script. I loved his art. It was like a, you know, perfect marriage of, you know, just, again, it wasn't a partnership. I was paying him, and would love to have him as a partner. So fast forward a little bit, I got all the character designs done through him. I got the first 6 pages, the cover, and then he got picked up by one of those, like, it was a card game. It wasn't Magic the Gathering, but it was another one of those, like, you know, had monsters and supernatural and fantasy creatures, which I couldn't blame him. You know, that was a good paying gig for him at the time. So I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do? I'm like, I have basically half a project done, you know? So at least I had the character designs that I could hand off to somebody else. But I was like, well, now what am I going to do with these pages, right? Mm-hmm. So luckily, the first 5 pages were a dream sequence. Mm-hmm. So I could play that off as like, okay, well, you look different in a dream, or dreams are sometimes more epic.
Right.
So that was where I thought was a good cutoff. So I basically lost 2 of the pages, I think, that he had done to this change. And then had Bakimon. I found Bakimon the same way.
Okay.
Was basically like, all right, well, I got to find somebody close. And when I saw his, I said, okay, well, this is close enough, I think, that I can get away with it.
Right.
And so I approached Oscar, who is he's the owner, and he was the artist who took over for Carlos. But he only did the illustration at the time, so I had to find a colorist. And that at the time was, to finish issue 1, was Ross A. Campbell, mm-hmm. who he did a phenomenal job on the rest of issue 1 for me, taking Bakiman's line art. And then, so when it came to that, well, moving into issue 2, Oscar started on issue 2. And I said, hey, are you ready? I said to Ross, I'm like, hey, are you available? He's like, actually, no, I got picked up by DC. And I went, awesome. I'm like, good for you, but
shit.
I was telling somebody else this story, and they're like, man, you're like the Good Luck Chuck of comics. or Bad Luck Chuck, or whatever the name of that Dane Cook movie. So yeah, I was like, yeah, exactly, right. So that's where and I had been following Gat mm-hmm. for some time, because he was also in the running at the time for the colorist. Okay. So then I approached him like right away, like it wasn't even a question. I was like, okay, Ross can't do it. I'm gonna ask Gat. Sure. And sure enough, Gat was like, yeah, well, I'd love to do it, man. Because he also was following like the art that I was posting from issue 1 and 2 on DeviantArt. Mm-hmm. So it was like nice that like we had that like mutual connection, that we were interested in each other's work.
That's awesome. It's good. It's one of those happy accidents, type.
It is. It really is. And then so luckily for me, after issue 3, well, I've kind of found out that Oscar was letting one of his underlings do issue 3, because if you compare issue 3 to issue 2, you can see there's a huge difference. And but at the time I was like, I have to get this out. I don't have time to go back and have him redraw it. You know what I mean? I wasn't arguing, because he had already fallen behind, and I think that's why he was busy focusing on his stuff.
Sure.
And so like I was like, it was months behind, and I'm like, I have to have this out. So after that, after issue 3 was done and the Kickstarter was funded, and I was in the middle of fulfillment, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to keep this ball rolling. I'm going to just reach out to Carlos and see what happens. So I emailed him. I said, hey, what would it take to get you back on this project? And he's like, well, I'm available. I'm not working that same job anymore. He basically, is working more of a 9 to 5. And so he has evening and he still does like freelance stuff. So I was like, awesome. And it turns out he was actually, more affordable than Oscar was to begin with. So I was like, even better.
There we go. Winner, winner, chicken dinner.
Exactly. I'm like, yes.
As you're doing the happy dance around the house.
I was like,
yeah. There you go. Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. With Rodney, I gotta ask, because he seems, I take him as he's a strong-willed character, decent, head on his shoulders, almost like a young Tony Stark type, because he has just enough arrogance where he's not a complete, pardon my French, not a complete ass, but he's still enjoyable to be around. Would you say with his newfound existence as Nightwolf, is he battling himself and his soul, trying to figure himself out?
In a way, that is kind of, it's so like he, with this particular breed of werewolf, the monk guy, you're either born a purebred, which is purely good, or a mongrel, which is purely evil. Right. He obviously is kind of a mixture of both, because one, he's not completely white furred or black furred. He's gradient, white to black, and he's a product of this modern age where like things aren't just good and evil. There's that gray line. I think that a lot of people now just, it is what it is. You're not wholly good. You're not wholly bad. Whereas like, so for him, it's kind of like that. That's why I refer to him more of an anti-hero, because he does the right thing for the most part, but a little bit for selfish reasons. Like he's not just like, oh, well, I'm going to take these guys out because that's the right thing to do, or I'm going to kill these guys because I want to. You know what I mean? It's a lot of it's like, purely revenge for things that happen in the book and going, after. So you know what I mean? It's not entirely like I'm doing this because it's the right thing to do, but it's because it's what I want to do. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like that. Like there's a little bit of selfishness to him. Like you said, there is a bit of a Tony Stark, like back and forth in his head too, because like, he has an arrogance about him, but then he kind of feels bad when he, if he said something to offend somebody, then he's like, oh, like you know what I mean? It's like, oh, I'm an asshole, Can
I take that back? Can I just press rewind and go back? Right?
Yeah. So, I mean, you'll see that interact. So, like, as Snowpaw is training him in future issues, you'll see a lot of because, like, her being more, purely good, she doesn't see things as gray as he does. And, like, the comments he makes often offend her. So, I
can see that. Yeah.
So there's those two, especially because she's almost 200 years older than him. There's a lot, and she's not, she bounces from place to place. She's more of a nomadic character and doesn't keep up on like pop culture. Whereas like he's like pop culture reference after pop culture reference. You know what I mean? Like like his wit is completely lost on her, and he's like, oh.
Yeah, there was the scene that sticks out as far as like a Rodney and Snowpaw's kind of interaction is when the hunter comes in, and the three of them are kind of going back and forth, and the hunter's like calm down, do you want me to get the newspaper type deal? And she's kind of lost on it. I was like, that's brilliant. Like I just go back and I'm like, God, that is so funny. Like, because who doesn't have a dog and want to like get the newspaper out? That's
right. Yeah, and that's what I mean. Like for Hunter, he particularly, for me, I wanted him to be very insulting.
Yeah,
like I wanted him to be like, I don't like you, I don't trust you.
Right.
but I'm like, just going to crack, I'm just going to take cracks at you to get your goat, and then you're going to do something, and then I'm going to end you. You know what I mean? Like, so that was basically his game, was basically to get him to go a little more feral, so that because he again, he kind of had been watching them and listening to the talk while they were down there, and Snowpaw was kind of talking about the situation. So he was kind of like watching what was going on from the trees. And so he doesn't necessarily, because of what happened with the situation with Snowpaw prior, he doesn't necessarily care for her, but he didn't really before that. He just tolerated her. Right. But with Rodney being something else entirely, he didn't want to take a risk. He just basically was like, all right, if you mess up, I'm going to take you out. Right. That's basically what it came down to.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's good stuff. I do got to ask, in issues, you give us little hints of other characters in Lone Wolf comics, Arcane, Crimson Dawn, Redemption. Is there a possible, are we going to see like a crossover? Are we going to see more incorporation of other characters?
So, yes, there will be. Actually, so those other characters are other titles that I plan on releasing. So they are their own title characters. Whereas, like, there will be a very large world-ending event that all four of them will have to come together. But there is a period where Crimson Dawn and Arcane will cross paths first.
Okay.
Kind of crossover, and Redemption and Nightwolf will cross paths first because they're more along the same lines of each other. Like, so, being our Redemption is another supernatural character. They kind of more in that realm, whereas like Crimson Dawn and Arcane are more on like the superhero-esque side of my universe, where they will cross a little bit more. And like I said, eventually that world-ending event that all four of them will come together. But that's a long ways off. Obviously, I still have to put those titles into play.
Sure.
So for me to insert them into issue 2 was kind of like my establishment that these characters do live in a shared universe, and that there is a possibility where they will cross their paths. And in so with this season of Nightwolf, if you will, I call it my first season. My first 12 issues basically revolve around this particular story arc that I'm building up to. And then after issue 12, 13 and on will then be, him traveling the country more, learning, basically getting into a bigger world of the shit that he stepped in. So that's where he starts to then cross paths with Redemption, and then eventually he'll cross paths with the others as he kind of goes cross country.
Very cool. Now, and talking about Lone Wolf Comics, because you yourself are based out of Pennsylvania, and because Lone Wolf is actually based out of Pennsylvania as well, right? So everything is out of correct?
Yes. Lone Wolf Comics. Like I said, it's my self-publishing company. Sure. I started on my own, and it's basically I'm from Western Pennsylvania. I live north of Pittsburgh, south of Erie, and south of Cleveland. Like, I can it's an hour and a half to each city. So I'm like in a perfect hub for like those three areas and Comic-Cons and stuff. So that's kind of like where I started from and spread out, when we were allowed to go to Comic-Cons.
Yeah. That was so long ago.
I know, right?
I remember 5 years ago, I went to a Comic-Con last year. It was great. It was marvelous. Oh, that's awesome. So right now, Nightwolf is on Kickstarter. And you can go through Kickstarter, and obviously you can go through the website, which is lonewolfcomics.com, I believe, correct?
Yes. You can, if you want to do the short link to the Kickstarter, it's lonewolfcomics.com/Nightwolf. And that'll take you directly to the Kickstarter. It's a lot easier than trying to figure out the whole link.
Yeah. And then you go here, you click here. Now, is there any plans in the future to possibly distribute Nightwolf to possibly LCSs Are they in LCSs in your local area? Is it a region thing?
Yeah, so they're in my local comic shops within like basically my area, the Pittsburgh area, and part of the Youngstown, Ohio area. So basically within driving distance.
Gotcha. Well, hey, for the wolf pack that's in the area, if you haven't already, if you're in the area, go to the LCS.
And there are, I have worked with a couple outside of the area that I've mailed to. So it's basically self-distribution at this moment. I haven't done the whole diamond approach yet, and I'm not sure if I'm going to, considering the state of things. I would like to, but again, it's like you have to have certain numbers for them, and at this point, like I'm more like I'm focused on trying to get as much out as I can at the time, and considering I have a full-time job and this, it's hard to work that kind of networking. Whereas like for Kickstarter has been very significant for me, as well as Comic-Cons were. But I had been driving, like before the pandemic, I had been driving. The farthest I've gone was to the Boston Fan Expo. So I've gone as far up there. I've gone to Baltimore Comic-Con. It's been all, Motor City was another one in Detroit. So I've basically been trying to get that like 8-hour driving radius con circuit as much as I can. But again, it's, it was good. It was great to be able to establish an audience for me, which helped me with my Kickstarters recently. And yeah, so this current Kickstarter is collecting the first 4 issues into a trade paperback, and also extra content, which I'm excited to share, because as we were talking about some of the different elements of the story, there are things that weren't introduced in the comics that I would love to keep in. But I've reached out to some guest writers, like Tyler James of Comics Tribe, Travis Gibbs. He right now is running a Kickstarter for Cthulhu Invades Oz, but he's also done like he just did Voodoo Nations, and then we also have like Kevin Joseph, who wrote Tart, and Madeline Holly Rosing, who has done the Boston Metaphysical Society. So these are all 4 great established writers who each have taken a 4-page chunk and created a short story based on directions that I gave them of things that I would have liked to had in these issues. So each writer got a 4-page chunk in each chapter that kind of will expand basically like issues 1, 2, 3, and 4 a little bit more, to give a little bit more of the story. And I'm excited to share these great stories with everybody.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as if, obviously, fans of, Nightwolf, the Wolfpack, they already know what a great, deal this is, especially with the new stuff. People following you on Twitter and Facebook, they're getting the regular updates and stuff. But for all of the new fans, all of the new people to Nightwolf, definitely check out that Kickstarter, the trade versions, issues 1 through 4. It's magnificent. We're rounding out the end of the show. I don't want to take up all your time on this Wednesday night, but I would like to talk a little bit about the future of Lone Wolf Comics. There was a little Snowpaw tease, coming in with her origin story, which I'm absolutely I'm waiting for. I've already started ticking down, on my calendars, we need to hurry. No rush or anything, but if we could kind of get there, but if you could talk a little bit about what the future holds for not only Nightwolf, but for Lone Wolf Comics, and what we can expect in the future from you guys.
Yeah. So after this campaign ends, basically we'll be doing fulfillment through February, that's going to give me time to wrap up Snowpaw, release the first few issues of it, to prepare her for her first Kickstarter, as well as I'm going to keep Carlos busy, because I'm going to keep him going one after another. When he finishes up, he's going to go into issue 5 for Nightwolf, and so we're going to have basically bing, bang, boom. We're going to keep going.
Sure.
So as soon as one fulfillment ends, we'll hit the other. So I'm hoping, February 2021, we're going to have Snowpaw, and then shortly after that, we're going to have Nightwolf issue 5, and then just keep on going. I feel like a lot of this has been snowballing. When I first started doing this, it was like it took me a year to get a comic out, and then it was like, okay, no, I'm going faster. I'm going faster. So I'm hoping to get to the point where I'll be able to put Nightwolf on its own legs and be able to keep producing on its own. So I can then, do the same thing with Snowpaw, once she gets going, and then be able to do the same with Redemption and Crimson Dawn and Arcane to build that world up, and then be able to show you that world-ending event. So that's the plan, the roadmap. It's just going ahead, doing it, and just like I said, hoping to get that snowball effect and rolling faster.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Rob, thank you so much for hanging out with us on a Wednesday night. Kind of late. Hopefully, we're not taking you away from too much. But anyway, folks out there, all the comic watchers, all the fans and everything, check out Nightwolf, check out Lone Wolf Comics. It's definitely worth your time. They got that Kickstarter going up right now. So in the meantime, thanks everybody for checking out comicwatch.com. Make sure you hit up lonewolfcomics.com and support Rob and everyone that works over there. This has been a special presentation of the Comic Watcher Show Presents. I am Mike Akins. This has been Rob Multari. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.